Yo, what's going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video. You guys already know the deal. Let's just get on with the video. So basically, here's what happened afterwards. After that awkward moment when Philo basically called Naofumi her dad for some reason, Naofumi, he wouldn't even acknowledge it. He wouldn't even address the moment afterwards. He decided to focus on spreading his services far and wide instead. With one of his services, it would include him having to use his divine healing magic. Well, not necessarily magic, but his divine healing aura on one of his clients. Now for me, he would actually hear a rumor about the other heroes while healing this client though. He decided not to focus on it for too much time though. He needed to work with some other people. He had more important business to focus on right now than to focus on meddling in the other hero's business, or so he thought. He decided not to give all of these rumors the time of day, but on one of his trips, Naofumi, he would find himself protecting an accessory dealer from some muggers. Now for me, he wouldn't have liked what he was seeing, so he would look through his skill list before finding something interesting. An ability he unlocked a while ago when he reached level 25. He never really had a chance to use it up until now, considering how circumstantial this was, but he figured that now would be a good time than ever, at least to just try it one time. This skill would be called the 10 Commandments. Now for me, he would roar, stating that thou shalt not steal. This would freeze the muggers in place while Raftalia, Tiberius, and Philo, they actually ended up knocking them out. They would be stuck in a frozen state for a while according to his skill description. So now for me, he would just move them off the road so they wouldn't be a hazard for others along the path. As a way of thanking Naofumi, the accessory dealer would actually teach the group how to use magic. In Naofumi's case, it was more so advanced magic since he was using some from the very beginning. Oddly enough, although Naofumi wasn't really even aware of that. For Naofumi, the dealer noticed that Naofumi's magic, it always seemed to be stronger, having some form of imbuement. Naofumi figured that it was probably his angelic physiology causing that to happen. Naofumi ended up finding himself learning how to craft accessories as well though. Before departing, the merchant would mention a business opportunity that Naofumi and his party could actually take up in Lerno village. So the group would unfortunately find themselves having to deal with plant monsters when they actually reached Lerno village. Apparently this was something that one of the heroes ended up doing. Now for me, he would be forced to fight off the monsters. He would eventually reach the source of it all, which was just one plant. This was apparently Multiyasu's doing, and well, he wouldn't have known this at first, but he figured that this was probably one of the heroes doing, or at least he had a hunch for right now. Maybe he was wrong, maybe he was right, he wasn't too sure, but he would just have Tiberius contain the main plant, while now for me, he would actually purify it. The surrounding plants would wither away, with Naofumi explaining that he removed the negative aspects to the plant to the villagers. Mainly the whole issue of the plant growing out of control originally, that had been completely removed from its system. Now it would be able to grow at a reasonably fast rate to help the village prosper. The villagers, they would be thankful to Naofumi, and they would even explain the whole situation regarding Motoyasu, granting them a miracle seed of the swords to help with this famine. Naofumi realized that his hunch was correct. He was really hoping that it wasn't, but he was also hoping that this would have just been the one and only time that this ever happened. The one and only time that the heroes actually screwed up. The villagers would mention that Motoyasu did mean well. He was apparently trying to help them with their famine, but, well, this whole miracle seed, it didn't go as planned. Naofumi, he would just sigh. He wouldn't be all that surprised at this point. The other heroes were still learning after all, but he was really hoping that when it came on to the other heroes, Ren and Itsuki, they would have made smarter decisions than Motoyasu. Naofumi, he would actually be offered some other crops though, as a form of thanks from the villagers. Tiberius, he would have actually immediately snatched the corn from one of the villagers, which would surprise them, but I think he would be happy to give it to one of Naofumi's teammates, or partners, or party members, whatever you want to call it. Naofumi, he was trying to discipline the Griffin boy, but it would fall on deaf ears though. The next place they would head to was Marso village. There they would discover that Ren actually made a fatal mistake as well. He, well, apparently killed a dragon, which, good for him. Naofumi applauded him for getting rid of that sort of mess, but he did end up having another issue. He did not get rid of the corpse. He still saw the world as a video game, oddly enough. He believed that this corpse would just disappear in a matter of moments, minutes. Who knew what he was thinking at the time? Naofumi, once again, he had to clean up his fellow heroes' mess. The group would make their way over to where the corpse was, hoping to simply dispose of it, but Naofumi, he would realize something was off. Raphtalia would be confused as to his hesitance, but Philo would actually mention that the dragon, well, they weren't dead. This would confuse Raphtalia even more. That was until the corpse began to move, which would shock the demi-human. The zombie dragon would roar at the group and begin to attack. Naofumi, he would do his best to defend himself and the rest of the group against the undead dragon, but he was struggling. He never experienced strength like this before. The zombie dragon would actually consume Phila at one point. Naofumi's eyes, they would widen in shock. He refused to believe that just happened. He refused to believe what he had just seen. There was absolutely no way. He tried to calm down and control his emotions, but the dragon would swat Raphtalia away. Naofumi was still getting over the fact that Philo had supposedly just died. He refused to believe that this monster literally just killed Philo right before his eyes, right in front of him. No, he couldn't believe that. Now this dragon also decided to swat away Raphtalia. She looked to be badly injured as well. Naofumi, he would snap at this moment. He tried to keep a calm composure up until now, but he would roar in rage, anger. He was infuriated at this moment. He was losing himself. His eyes, they would glow red as his wings began to flicker as well. A dark red aura would consume Naofumi at this moment. He could practically feel the despair in this situation. He could feel the despair in the air and everything. It was fueling him right now. His veins, they were popping, his muscles bulged. He would charge at the zombie dragon. He would grab their mouth, forcing it open. His aura was burning away at the monster. Naofumi, he would demand to know where Philo was. The dragon would have no response. Instead, they would try to use poisonous breath to knock out Naofumi. The silence would just anger Naofumi more though. Even when they tried to use that poisonous breath, it had no effect on Naofumi. Instead, he would rip away at the dragon corpse's jaw before tearing away at the rest of their body. Naofumi's range was beginning to affect Tiberius as well. Tiberius was in his griffin form. It was larger than usual though, and his eyes were also red. Tiberius, they would claw away at the dragon's eyes before attempting to break off its wings. Something would surprise everyone though. This would be Philo. Philo managed to break free from the zombie dragon's stomach at this moment. She managed to tear a hole through the stomach in order to escape. Naofumi, he couldn't believe it. Philo, she was actually alive. Philo would even chirp at him. And Naofumi, he had to feel her up to believe this. He would calm down and descend to see if it was really her or a hallucination. He would touch her face in order to make sure. And sure enough, she really was alive. Naofumi, he was relieved. His wings, they would become white once more, and his eyes, their usual color again. His aura returned back to normal before he collapsed to one knee, a bit tired. Tiberius would shrink back down to his regular size and be grateful to see his quote-unquote sister alive. While on their next journey, Naofumi's party would encounter a girl by the name of Melty. She would request a favor from the group, that being to escort her back to Castletown. Naofumi, he would actually be fine with this for the most part, so long as she was okay being around Philo and Tiberius. Melty would actually see the two turn into their animal states, and she would immediately want to pet the two of them. Naofumi, he would chuckle before giving her the green light to do so. Once they reached their location, the group would decide to upgrade their weapons, with Naofumi even attempting to pick up a weapon himself, only to get shocked. He would get an alert from the system mentioning how he couldn't use any other weapon besides one that he was brought into this world with. Naofumi was surprised. He never had a reason to use any weapons up until now, but the system was apparently telling him all of this new information. Naofumi really wished he decided to learn about this earlier, but then again, he doubted that much would really change besides some embarrassment. He found that the system refusing to let him use any other weapons was pretty odd. He also found that the group needed some class upgrades if they wished to level up any further from this point forward. Erhard would tell the group that they could do so at the Dragon Hourglass. While heading over there, they would encounter Motoyasu, who would actually attempt to fight Naofumi. Melty, though, she would stop Motoyasu in his tracks. She would declare her real status before the both of them. This would especially surprise Naofumi. Motoyasu, he would be forced to stand down according to her royal decree once Naofumi's party made it to where the Dragon Hourglass was being kept to get their class upgrades. They would actually be turned down by some of the members from the Church of the Three Heroes. The The group would actually question why, but this was apparently a royal decree from the king himself. Naofumi, he would once again sigh. He was doing a lot of sighing these past couple of days. More and more disappointments kept on rolling in. But the party would leave. They wouldn't bother trying to make a whole fuss about it. They would enter a new territory that had been stricken with famine afterwards. They went to like a north territory, and this was what they saw. Naofumi would find out that apparently Itsuki, he led a revolution against tyrannical rule, but the only issue was that an even worse power came into rule as a result. Wow, that's really great. Naofumi honestly had to applaud Itsuki for that. He managed to make an even worse mess up than Ran and Motoyasu so far. How impeccable. Naofumi, he would begin to become annoyed with the incompetence of his fellow heroes now. Naofumi, he will try to help the people though by blessing the soil causing for a rapid growth of plants. The people, they would be grateful for Naofumi's miracle work. Naofumi would simply give them a thumbs up before mentioning how they should thank the being above for giving him the power to create such miracles in the first place. They would be confused, but they would accept what Naofumi was saying. Before the third wave began, Naofumi would actually meet up with Ren and Itsuki. They would have been mentioning, well, their wages being stolen by somebody. They would look over to Naofumi, and they would notice that with all of this, with everything that they had heard, it really seemed as if he was probably the one to have stolen their wages. Naofumi, he would correct the two though by explaining that they didn't complete their assignments properly. He will call out their incompetence, which would, of course, make them unworthy of rewards. The wave would begin not too long later, but when it came on to Ren and Itsuki, they had a moment of realization. Everything that Naofumi was saying, it really forced them to think about how this world operated, and in this next wave, they had to really carry that sort of weight on their consciousness, or conscience, I mean. Well, not really. They would forget just a couple minutes later, seemingly. All of the heroes and their parties, they will be teleported over to the location of the wave, while the rest of the heroes, they would head over to find the boss of the wave, rather than trying to help the villagers or anything. Naofumi, he would decide to do the exact opposite. He would decide to occupy his time with protecting one of the villagers, just like last time. Something would feel off though. It had been a while since the wave started at this point, and Raftalia would even comment on how the other heroes were doing. She was questioning what was taking them so long. Naofumi and Raftalia, they would decide to leave Philo and Tiberius in order to deal with any other monsters that made their way into the village. They figured they could hold their own in a fight at this point. Naofumi would pick up Raftalia and they would soar into the sky, searching for the rest of the heroes. They would find the heroes actually bickering amongst each other about where the boss was. Naofumi, he had tried to keep a cool head in this world, especially when it came on to his fellow heroes, but they were making it increasingly more difficult after finding out all of their misdeeds, or like all of their mistakes when it came on to helping the villagers last time, and then seeing what they were doing now, bickering amongst each other. This would actually cause Naofumi to reach a breaking point. He would yell at his fellow heroes, telling them to get themselves together, get their stuff together for crying out loud. Raphtalia would show up the heroes by being the only one to actually find the boss of the wave. Naofumi would even point this out, mentioning how Raphtalia wasn't even a hero, unlike the three others. So how was she already doing better than them? It made no sense. They should have been leveling up like crazy. They should have been doing their jobs. They should have been doing all of these good deeds, but look at them right now. They were literally bickering amongst each other about the silliest of things in the middle of a wave. The monster would appear to be a soul eater, and they were already too strong for the other heroes to deal with. Naofumi, he would just tell the others to step aside while he handled this. He would shoot light rays at the monster, which would damage it quite a bit. It still wasn't enough to put them down completely though, so Raphtalia, she would strike at the monster as well. It didn't seem to do too much damage, unfortunately. Naofumi, he was getting aggravated. He would decide to take some of the lessons he learned from the merchant here by calling Raphtalia back over. He remembered something about his magic being stronger than the average person, and he remembered how he could basically imbue some stuff with holy magic or whatever. He wasn't completely sure how it worked. It worked, but for some reason he could bless things, give them stronger attributes. He wondered if he could imbue Raphtalia's sword with some of his magic, some of his holy magic. He just at least a temporary increase of strength, just to give her an edge in this battle. That's what Naofumi was hoping for. He would call her over and enchant the sword. He would add his holy aura to the sword, and the sword would become golden at this moment. Raphtalia would notice the stats on the sword increase by 10-fold. She would smirk, dashing toward the Soul Eater. This time, when she struck, it would injure the monster severely. Naofumi would send out fire magic to take down the monster afterward. The wave didn't end despite the duo managing to kill the Soul Eater. Naofumi's blessing upon Raphtalia's sword would have dissipated as well. But a woman with warfrans, she would appear and introduce herself as Glass. Naofumi could already tell that she was powerful simply by looking at her. She would blow away the other heroes, not even acknowledging them. She would point her friends at Naofumi though. She would state that he was strong. She wanted to fight him specifically. He needed to die first. The other heroes she could deal with later. Naofumi was the one of importance right now. Naofumi would be alarmed hearing this, and he would get out of the way of the next attack. Naofumi, he would send a barrage of feather projectiles at her, but they would all get blown away. Naofumi would attempt to use his light rays, and well, they would actually injure her. She had brain marks, but it wasn't enough to actually keep her down for long. Naofumi would grit his teeth and consider going into that cursed series he unlocked when he first thought that Philo was dead, when he had to fight that zombie dragon. But Raphtalia, she would see the look on Naofumi's face and convince him not to go into that form. It wasn't ideal to use that form whatsoever. It was terrifying to see him become something like that. And in all honesty, she honestly thought that she had lost Naofumi at that moment back then. Naofumi, he would actually look at Raphtalia and he would reconsider. Eventually, he would agree not to use the form. Well, that was unless he literally saw no other option. For now, he would use more of his light rays and his superior speed when it came on to flight to wear her down. His magic also appeared to work against her as well. Holy fireballs, wind blades, and I was about to say iron. Ice blasts. These were the sorts of attacks that Naofumi was using. All these attacks, they would seem to give off a certain amount of damage towards the one known as glass. Naofumi would overwhelm her with attacks, not giving her enough time to counter-attack. The attacks, they didn't have enough power to completely take down glass though. Not yet. Naofumi needed to get stronger for that. Naofumi would hold her back though. That's all that Naofumi was concerned about. At least he managed to do that. So by the end, glass would simply escape through the wave. Naofumi would descend from the sky and breathe heavily. He never had to exert himself like that before. After the end of the wave, King Oldcray would request for Naofumi to appear before him. While in his throne room, King Oldcray would actually demand that Naofumi tell him how he became so strong, but Naofumi, he will be hesitant to tell the king that. The two of them didn't really have the best relationship. They didn't really see eye to eye to begin with, and he figured the king, they would just tell the other heroes about how Naofumi became so strong so that they could become stronger as well for the next couple of waves. It sounded a bit selfish, but Naofumi had a good reason. He wouldn't have had a problem with the other heroes finding out how to become as strong as he did if it weren't for the fact that the other three heroes were incredibly irresponsible. He literally had to clean up for them so many times already. He even had to clean up for them during the wave, for crying out loud. Oldcray would threaten Naofumi's party only for Naofumi to summon fire into his hands. He would let the king know this one thing. He wasn't usually like this, but the king was really pushing his limits right now. He would inform the king that if he were to ever so harm his party in any way, even if he were to touch his party members, he would merge that crown onto his skull. He would make sure that the king would not be able to take off his crown that he also worshipped, for crying out loud. The fact that the king had some authority, alright, he had some authority over Melvin. That's cool, but Naofumi, he was a hero. He could technically just kill the king if he wanted to. The king would be appalled and just cast Naofumi out of his sanctum. Naofumi, he wouldn't even be all that concerned. He would have just left with his party to head to Shield Freedom after finding out from Erhard that there were apparently more dragon hourglasses in other regions other than Melvin, and he needed to get class upgrades for his party soon. Melty would try to confront Naofumi though while he was leaving. She wished for him and their father to make up with each other. This would also mean Naofumi had to apologize to the king, which Naofumi would refuse. Before Naofumi could even utter those words though, he would instinctively grab the girl and he would have his wings cover her. They were meant to protect her from the knights who were ready to betray her at this moment. It seemed as if they were ready to stamp through her. They would have charged at the girl, but Naofumi would have immediately grabbed her. Naofumi would shoot down the knight who was prepared to kill her, but they just got blocked by, of course, Naofumi's wings, which were as strong as steel at this point. That's when Naofumi would have struck. Naofumi wouldn't have had any idea that the whole event was being recorded though. They were made to be the bad guys in this situation. They were made to make... This orb was basically meant to make Naofumi out to be the bad guy in the situation, not even showing that he actually protected Melty from being from being killed by one of the soldiers. Some of her escort were trying to escape, but Naofumi, he would be quick to grab them and he would interrogate them right after. They wanted to lie, but when it came onto Naofumi's aura, it forced them to tell the entire truth and nothing but the truth. Naofumi would even use the commandment, one of the commandments mentioning how that it was not okay for them to lie. This would force them to tell the truth even more. They would be 100% honest in this situation. There was a 100% guarantee at this point. And here in the situation, Naofumi, he couldn't believe it. Melty's own sister would do something like this. He knew that when it came on to mine, she was a pretty bad character, but to go against their own family? Oh, now that was a whole nother low for this red-haired girl. They would make their way straight to Shield Freedom, but a shadow would actually stop Naofumi in his tracks. According to the Queen herself, she wanted Naofumi to go to Siltred instead so that she would be able to meet up with him. Naofumi would be informed by Melty that her mother was a better judge of character than her father ever was or ever will. So Naofumi, he would decide to listen to her. She promised that he would like her if they ever met as well. So that was another reason for why he was going to give the queen a chance. He decided not to let the king's way of treatment influence his opinion on this woman. After all, Melty was nice and she was the offspring of this guy, so surely the queen was probably another character as well, maybe nicer. Maybe Melty got her personality more so from her mother. Naofumi, he would change direction, but he was originally just going to have Philo just walk them all the way there, just have Philo take them all the way there. But when he heard some noises in the background and some footsteps, he would request for Tiberius to trade places with Philo and take flight. After all, he recognized these voices, and those steps sounded as if they were on a horse or something. It would make the trip a bit bumpy, but they would make it to Siltbed faster doing so. He figured that the other heroes, they were here to arrest him after all, after hearing the story from those guards, and now it just wasn't going to be all that ideal to really deal with these guys right now. Once the group managed to arrive at Siltbelt, Melty would make a request. That being for them to stay with one of her friends who was a pretty nice noble, not the snobby kind at all. Naofumi wasn't necessarily the shield hero, but he did share characteristics with them. The noble would provide shelter for the group until another noble allied with the three heroes' church would grow suspicious of their deeds. He would try to kidnap Ran and Melty, but he would get pinned to the wall instead by Naofumi's feather blades. Raftalia would recognize the noble as the one who used to torture her and other demi-humans before she met Naofumi. She would walk up to the slave owner and she would draw out her sword. She would mention how he used to do the most despicable acts to her and her friends. Naofumi would realize what she was about to do, and he would even try to stop her, but he would be too late though. She plunged her sword into the noble's heart. She would make sure to kill him on the spot. She wasn't about to just let this guy go after all of the torture that she went through as a kid, after all of the torture that he brought among many others, all because of their race. How racist could this guy be? She always despised this guy, and she always wished that she could have payback against this guy. This was her time. This was her chance. and Naofumi gave her the confidence to do so as well, all over the time that she had been with him. Sure, she believed in his beliefs as well, but this was an exception. She had to do this, or else she would always feel guilty. She had a feeling that this guy would continue to do these evil acts all the time. She honestly felt like she was doing everybody a favor by getting rid of this guy. She would declare that this was payback for all the years of suffering that she had gone through when she ended up plunging that sword into him. And Raftalia, she would apologize to Naofumi afterwards, but she would lead the group over to where the other demi-humans were. She remembered the same dungeon that she used to be tortured in. The dungeon with all of the demi-humans would be found once they managed to, well, of course, find out where the noble lived. Van would have been the one to actually inform the group. They would free and heal all of the slaves afterwards. Raftalia, she would realize something though, and she would begin to tear up. One of her childhood friends, Rafana was her name. She was already dead. She wasn't able to make it in time. Naofumi, Keel, Philo, and Tiberius, they would cheer the girl up though. As the group were making their way back though, they would end up encountering someone with wings just like Naofumi, Philo, and Tiberius. She would approach Naofumi, introducing herself as Pretoria. Apparently, she was the Filial Queen. She would state her confusion as to why he hadn't come to help the other countries as of yet during the waves. But Naofumi's eyes, they would widen at this realization. He supposed it made sense that there were waves in other countries, but this whole time he generally thought that waves were just happening in Melomike. He never really thought to check anywhere else. He would give his deepest of apologies to Victoria, but she would just wave her hands, mentioning that was unnecessary. Now for me, he had nothing to apologize for. He had absolutely none, simply because of the fact that he didn't know after all. Now, if he did know and he still decided to only help Melomike, well, that was an issue. Especially with the whole thing with the literally being no heroes to protect the other countries. She had been taking their place for the longest so far. She had basically been protecting the people for a while now when it came onto the waves, but she had to admit that eventually these waves were probably going to become too strong for even her to handle on her own. She would request for Naofumi to make peace with the rest of the heroes soon. They needed to beat these waves together after all. If not, well, the thing is, Victoria, she probably wouldn't have to, well, kill each and every last one of the heroes. That way, they would be able to force other countries to summon more heroes in their place, considering that they couldn't summon more heroes without having it be that the other 4 heroes died already. Some that were hopefully more capable than Naofumi's group so far. Naofumi was already pretty capable, but when it came on to the other 3, they just weren't doing as well. She would bring the group over to her territory, where she would also fight Philo. She would keep Philo from transforming into her filial form, and she would put her on the defensive. Philo would try to counterattack against her senior, but most of her attacks were parried instead. Philo would be pinned down by Victoria, but she would be impressed that Philo managed to hold on for so long. She would declare Philo to be her successor, and a cowlick would appear on Philo's head. She really didn't like it. She would ask for Tiberius to remove it, but it would sprout back immediately. Victoria, she would just giggle a bit, and she would mention that when it came on to Philo and Tiberius's relationship, it was pretty odd to say the least. Philo would question why, and Victoria would mention the whole thing with griffins. Apparently a long time ago, griffins actually made flying Philolials extinct. Basically, when it came on to Philolials and dragons, they both had a natural enemy. Philolials and dragons, they naturally had a disdain towards each other, but when it came on to griffins as well, they also seemed to have a disdain towards that race as well. Especially with how they were mutated over the years as well, and how they did end up, killing off their cousins. But when it came on to Philo and Tiberius, it seemed as if Naofumi had an effect on them. Philo did mention that she basically knew Tiberius since birth, and Victoria figured that they were probably just an exception. This being, because of the fact that they were raised by a legendary hero, in this case being Naofumi. And since they were together since birth, that was probably why they didn't have a disdain towards each other. Or maybe it was just because they were young right now. She was honestly not really sure. She was just making assumptions right now. But she would teleport Naofumi's party over to where the other heroes were, so he could clear up this story with them. Actually get along with the heroes for once. Get along with his fellow heroes. Unfortunately, the closest hero that they would find would end up being Motoyasu. And, Motoyasu, he would immediately try to attack Naofumi. Raftalia and Tiberius, they would get in the way though. Raftalia, she would have blocked their attack with her sword, while Tiberius, he would have turned into his full griffin form, pinning Motoyasu down to the floor. Motoyasu would talk about how Naofumi killed Ren and Itsuki, but Naofumi, he would be very confused as to what Motoyasu was talking about. He was all the way up in Siltwelt up until now, nowhere close to where they were right now. Motoyasu, he would begin to start struggling when he heard this. Naofumi had an alibi that perfectly covered the story. Supposedly covered the story at the very least. He was a bit sketchy at first, but he did have to recognize that Naofumi also had wings, and same for Tiberius, so it wasn't hard to believe that he was potentially wrong, and that Naofumi could have just flown over to Siltfeld and he could have just came back. He honestly wasn't all that sure right now, but Motoyasu, he would question who else could have possibly killed Ren and Itsuki, but at this moment a large-scale attack would try to hit Naofumi, Tiberius, and Motoyasu. They would move out to the way, and Tiberius, they would release their hold on Motoyasu. They realized that they had a bigger threat at hand right now. They would find the source of the attack to be from the Pope of the Three Heroes Church. He would bring up how Naofumi could never be a minister. He was a devil and a fake hero after all. He would put an end to these wolves in sheep's clothing. Today, finally, he would be wielding a weapon that was said to have the power of the bow, the sword, spear, and shield combined. The only issue though was that it took an immense amount of energy to use. Just that one strike. That one strike could have possibly killed a person. It very well did actually. The Pope's followers, they would be behind him, giving up their life force to power the weapon. Now for me, he would bring up how this wasn't what a pastor was supposed to do. He was supposed to lead the people to God. what he was doing right now was the exact opposite. He was leading the people only to misfortune and death. The Pope would simply ignore Naofumi's words though, and he would attack. Followers, they would actually collapse to the ground every time the Pope used one attack. Naofumi, he would be enraged seeing this. He was honestly about to enter into his cursed series once more, but he would end up remembering Raphtalia's words. That series, it wasn't good to use at all. He would honestly just push past this rage though. He would unlock a new series in its place. It was called the Blessed Series. Once Naofumi got over his rage and trying to keep a clear head, push past his rage that was blinding him most of the time. This was what would actually unlock the Blessed Series. The Pope, they would of course trying to shoot an energy attack at Naofumi, Multiasu, and Tiberius, but well, they would all try to dodge. That was until they realized that it was just too large. At first it looked to be small, but it suddenly grew to a large extent. Naofumi, he would be forced to find a way to block the attack instead here. Suddenly, a giant gold and white shield would appear. It was somewhat transparent though. It was as if it wasn't completely there. Naofumi, he would be surprised to see the shield, which formed right in front of the group suddenly. It managed to block the attack for Naofumi. Just as soon as the shield appeared though, it vanished. Naofumi would look at the skills and realize that this was apparently part of the skill set for the Blessed Series. Naofumi would charge at the Pope, continuously blocking his attacks with this shield appearing all around him every single time. It wouldn't stay for long, but it would continuously serve its purpose. Naofumi would try to shoot his feather blades once again, but when he got closer, it would actually turn into swords of light. Well, let me actually rephrase this. When Naofumi tried to shoot his feather blades once again, at least when he got closer to the Pope, they would not be feather blades anymore. They would actually be straight up swords of light. It seemed that in this series, he could use and produce holy weapons, albeit less durable than the legendary weapons. The strength of the holy weapons, the strength of these holy weapons that he was producing, they seemed to make up for the durability though. They were incredibly strong in his opinion. Naofumi, he would just dodge more attacks from the Pope while continuing to wear this guy down with his own set of attacks. His attacks, they were too fast for the Pope to dodge or even block. And Naofumi, he even had the perks of the Cursed series, just without the negative side effects seemingly. The Pope would be forced to admit to defeat, and he would bow in said defeat. He would beg for mercy from Naofumi, and Naofumi, he was honestly willing to simply have the man be arrested and force him to repent about his actions with Raptalia. She would walk him to the Pope instead. She would hear everything that the Pope was saying, but she would decide to just kill him right then and there. Shocking Naofumi. Raptalia, she would explain that the Pope would most likely just try to regain his influence in the Empire and try to kill the group again. She didn't believe in showing enemies like the Pope mercy. Naofumi, he would deactivate the Blessed series and he would pass out right after, having exerted way too much energy in that form. By the time Naofumi would wake up, he would have been introduced to the Queen of Melvermike. She would welcome him back to the world of the living and give him a quick catch up on the most recent events. He woke up just in time, considering that she was in the middle of a trial for her recently dethroned husband and daughter after she found out all about, well, their misdeeds. Mine, she had a slave crest placed onto her so that she would be forced to tell the truth or risk actually getting electrocuted. Motoyasu would refuse to believe what Mine was saying when she was being questioned. She would have even admitted to making sure all of the heroes were summoned to Melormike just so that none of the other countries could have a hero to protect them during the waves. Melormike was supposed to be the only kingdom in power at this point. And Ulfcray, he simply followed along with her ideas since she was his beloved daughter. The queen would allow for Naofumi to come up with a punishment since their crimes affected him the most, and Naofumi would actually think for a moment before deciding to have it be that the king become an adventurer alongside his daughter, reflecting on their decisions in the past. Naofumi wanted these two to obviously become better people after all, and repent for the things that they did in the past. The queen would just be relieved that Naofumi didn't decide with giving the two the death penalty. Naofumi genuinely was an honorable person. Naofumi and his party, they would head over to the Dragon Hourglass afterward. This time around, they would have no issues with class upgrades since the Church of the Three Heroes had been disbanded. Instead, the Church of the Five Heroes would take its place. It would have originally been the Church of the Four Heroes the Queen implemented, which would revolve around the bow, sword, spear, and shields hero, but obviously she had to take into account Naofumi's own situation. Naofumi, he didn't fit the description of any of those four recognizable weapons, so she had to wear was five heroes instead by anyone in Naofumi's situation, regardless of if they were the Angelic hero, Shovel hero, or whatever. Whichever other different hero would be exempted as well. They all deserve to be praised by the people, considering the fact that they would all be given the same amount of effort in protecting the people against the waves and giving them hope. The group, when getting their class upgrades, would realize that they weren't able to choose their paths for some reason. Apparently the cow looked at Victoria gave Philo. It actually interfered with the ceremony. Now for me, you would be fine with this though. The crew would just head over to Calmira Island after the Queen informed the four heroes about there apparently being an event there where they could grow at a more rapid rate than usual. Naofumi would especially be up for this, but while on the trip, Naofumi would meet up with a couple of other people. They would have introduced themselves by these names, Lark and Therese. They seemed to be rather friendly people. Naofumi liked them, although they didn't believe him at first when he told them his name. They figured he was some sort of cosplayer or part of another race, which was why he had wings rather than him being the legit angelic hero Naofumi. Once they made it to Calmira, Naofumi would find that the other heroes were suffering from motion sickness. He found that bit to be pretty hilarious. After all these guys had to deal with, they were suffering from motion sickness? He would use the first day to simply explore the region. The next day, Naofumi, he would soar through the skies with Tiberius hunting monsters in the sky, while Philo and Raftalia, they would focus on the monsters on ground level. Naofumi would also go for some monsters in the ocean as well. The group would level up rather quickly during their hunting adventure, though Naofumi's party, they would bump into Lark and Therese again. They would team up, taking down several more monsters that were across the islands together. Lark would personally soar through the sky on Tiberius, mentioning how exhilarating it was to just be flying like this. Naofumi would smirk. He would mention how he wasn't really one to ride on the griffin simply because he had wings himself. It would be pretty redundant usually, unless it was an emergency. Like would laugh hearing this. He would have to agree with Naofumi on this part. Naofumi would notice something off with Lark and Therese though, while they were doing their adventures. Their weapons, they seemed to work awfully similar to himself and the other three cardinal heroes. He decided to keep that note to himself though, rather than say anything for now. Eventually, Naofumi's group, they would have leveled up to a point where, even with the island's conditions of being able to gain experience faster, it was hardly noticeable at this point that they were getting any stronger, that they weren't even getting any sort of experience points. Naofumi would be disappointed, but he would understand. The group, they were just deciding to enjoy the island for the rest of the time being, until Philo went swimming. This wouldn't have been anything alarming until she went into the depths of the ocean when she swam underwater and found an underwater dragon hourglass. She would immediately swim back up to the surface and run over to Naofumi, alerting him on the situation. He would take a look himself and he would be shocked as well. They only had 48 hours to prepare for the next wave. Naofumi, he would soar through the sky, searching for the queen. He would inform her of the situation, and defenses they would be set up accordingly to combat the next wave. Once the wave started, Lark and Therese, they would prove to be rather strong and reliable individuals throughout the wave. They would even take down the wave boss in one strike, for crying out loud. After they were done with the boss though, the duo, they would turn on the heroes though. They would immediately go to strike at Naofumi. Like would explain that he and Therese, they actually came from another world in where they experienced waves as well. Their world wouldn't be able to take many more of these waves, so well, they were forced to come to Naofumi's own. The reason being that they had to kill him and the other heroes. This would lead to their world being unable to handle the rest of the waves moving forward, and this world would end up dying, but like so, they wouldn't have to experience any more waves. Like was willing to go through such drastic measures if it meant that he would be able to protect his people. Naofumi, he would just use his blessed series in order to create a wall against Lark's scythe attacks. Tiberius would soar down from the sky in his animal form, hoping to claw at Lark's face. Like they would dodge though, only getting grazed in the chest. Philo would try to use wind attacks in order to, at the very least, cause for Lark and Therese to lose their balance. Naofumi would create a bubble around Lark and Therese. He would trap them inside and question them. Well, not really Naofumi. Naofumi wanted to question them, but Lark would actually beat him to it. They would question how Naofumi was able to create these objects, considering how he was the angelic hero. Things like light manipulation and being able to fly, yeah, that didn't surprise him at all. But this was unusual. Naofumi would mention one of the special traits of his blessed series being the ability to create astral constructs with a holy imbuement of sorts, basically like an extension of his aura. He supposed being able to reach the blessed series was easier with his background and him being the angelic hero as well, but Naofumi, he wouldn't have a lot of time to ponder on how he was able to really reach the blessed series, because a wind strike would actually be aimed at Naofumi. Raphtalia, they would be the one to block the attack though. She would get blown back though, in the process. This would alarm Naofumi. He would turn around to see Glass once again. He would dodge attacks from her and create a shield to block the few that were too close for comfort to test his luck. Rila would mention how Naofumi's bubble disappeared though, that was holding off Loic and Therese. Naofumi's eyes would widen. He would soar into the sky and send several arrows of light at the three enemies, since he couldn't handle all three on the ground. Glass would try to deflect the attacks, but some would actually slip by. They would pierce through her shoulder and her leg. Loic and Therese would also get injured. Tiberius would slam into Loic and Therese at this moment. He was angry. He had basically been betrayed by these two. He had genuinely liked Loic as well. This guy seemed to be rather cool, but now he was talking about killing off their world? That's not cool. Naofumi would explain that he didn't want to fight Glass, who was currently his main enemy in this wave right now, since, well, Loic and Therese are being occupied by his griffin. But when Naofumi mentioned how they should be working together in order to resolve these waves, Glass, they would hear none of it. They would just jump into the air, attempting to slice him with their fans, but they would get burned instead. She would hiss in pain. Naofumi would mention his passive ability while the Blessed series was running. That being, well, the bending effects of his aura. It was originally something that was part of his Cursed series, but apparently that also ended up following through into his Blessed series as well. It honestly seemed like most of the abilities from his Cursed series, it would be applied over to his Blessed series as well, with better breaks, you could say, and less drawbacks. It was like a golden fire basically in this form rather than red though. She could call him an Archangel technically if she really wanted. While he was using his Blessed series, he would encase her in a bubble, but she would be able to break out of it with some difficulty. Glass would mention how Naofumi was a rather annoying warrior, but she honestly had to respect his strength. She could attempt another attack, sure, but at this moment, a barrel of Rucolo fruit. I actually don't know how to pronounce this. Rucolo. Yeah, whatever. Some sort of fruit would be launched over by the queen and a girl with green hair over to where Naofumi and Glass were fighting. It would basically envelop the whole area, and this fruit in particular, it was an extremely intoxicating fruit. Just one was enough to actually make a person tipsy. Just imagine a whole barrel full. Yeah, anyone within the area would be intoxicated with such a quantity in the air. Naofumi would have been too high in the air though for him to actually be affected. Glass was now incapable of fighting any longer, so Loic and Therese, they would see this and smack away Tiberius just to buy themselves time. They would escape though through the wave, and dragging Glass back home with them. It would become apparent that the other heroes were incredibly weak in comparison to Naofumi after the wave. So the queen would set something up. Set up a meeting between the four heroes so that they could inform each other of their ways of growing stronger. Naofumi would mention his holy imbuements and his Blessed series, but the other heroes, they were seemingly incapable of using them for some reason. Naofumi would then find the heroes arguing amongst each other about what way of leveling up was better. Naofumi, he would just sigh and leave the scene. He would wait for them to calm down. He would reflect on the wave and realize that Tiberius, they actually needed a teammate. He saw how well that Tiberius did with Like, after all, when they were on Chimera Island. Like was able to cover up all of Tiberius's blind spots, and when he actually had to fight against Like and Therese, he knows that they did have some issues while fighting them. They did have some blind spots that he wouldn't have recognized earlier if it weren't for Like basically being his partner during the Chimera Island event. So now for me, he had to find somebody who would be willing to help Tiberius. He had to find somebody that could actually help Tiberius when fighting in the sky. Someone to cover those blind spots. So now for me, would go on searching. Now for me, he would have been Tiberius's partner, but well, now for me, he could fly perfectly fine on his own. He could attack in midair as well, but when it came on to just riding Tiberius into battle, it wasn't the same. You notice that he had tried this before, but every time it just felt odd. He wasn't able to be as free in battle as he usually was. Raftalia could ride on Philo in some fights in order to use combo attacks, but that wasn't the same case with Naofumi. He was too used to flying on his own as well to adjust to creating combo attacks with Tiberius. One day he would actually find Motoyasu trying to comfort a girl with green hair. He actually recognized this girl being next to the queen during the last wave. He approached her too, and he would question what happened. Apparently she was taken off Itsuki's party for something that she didn't do. She was supposedly framed. Huh. Deja vu. Now for me, he honestly had to chuckle a bit hearing this. That was basically his life story when he first came to this world, and nobody believed that he was telling the truth. Nobody believed him for some reason, but well, the other heroes believed him, and Motoyasu, he didn't want to believe Naofumi at first either. So Naofumi, he would decide to confront Itsuki about the situation, but the blonde would actually refuse to accept the girl back into his party. Naofumi, he would see the girl on the rooftop the next time he saw her, and he would request for Tiberius to go save her before she could do what he was thinking she was about to do. The girl would jump only to land on onto Tiberius's back. She would be surprised to see the large griffin. Tiberius, he would bring her over to Naofumi, and he would offer her an opportunity of a lifetime. That being, of course, to join his party. After all, Tiberius really needed a teammate to help with his blind spots when fighting in the sky. He had been looking for somebody for a while now, and, well, this girl, she seemed like a perfect fit. He figured that she could fight, after all, considering that she was part of Itsuki's party up until now. And Tiberius was not in agreement when it came on to having the girl be with him as his partner in crime of sorts. Now for me, he would honestly be really happy to see that Tiberius was already taking a liking to the girl. The girl would tear up before accepting. She was honestly really happy to just be part of one of the four heroes' parties once again. Now for me, he would smile and ask for the girl's name. The girl's name would have been Rishia. You guys tell me in the comments how it's pronounced. But yeah, that's basically how I'm going to be ending it, guys. This is basically meant to be the finale of Angelic Hero, and I know that season 2, our Shield Hero, is coming out soon, but like there's going to be plenty of more Shield Hero whatever's coming soon, and more Hero Academia and whatever. So something like this where I'm ending it right now, I feel that this would be a good time to end it. A good point to end it, considering I don't know what will genuinely be happening in Season 2. It's hard to predict, to be honest, and the amount of wait I would have to do, it would be very unnecessary. So yeah, that's how I'm just going to be ending it for right now, people. It's your boy King Tiny Next signing out. You guys already know the deal. If you guys liked the video, well, hit that like button. If you've been rocking with my content for a little while now, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Help with the algorithm. Even share it to a couple of friends who are interested in this sort of content as well. But yeah, it's your boy King Tiny Next officially signing out. Peace.